Welcome, Jennifer and Roberto, to the Conversations on Collective Wellbeing. How are you both?
Doing great. Thank you for having us, Linda.
Thank
Doing
you.
well, thank you.
Um, so I'm going to start perhaps with you, Jennifer. Could you please introduce yourself and talk to us a little bit about your work around well-being?
Sure. So my name is Jennifer Leavitt-Moy. Roberto and I have worked together for many years, and most recently we've been working for the Alliance for the Seventh Generation. And in my role with the Alliance, I have been doing project management, helping bring together groups of experts that Roberto mainly has identified as he was doing a global scan of people within education who are doing an excellent job of working with youth who sometimes don't thrive in academic settings. And so he did a global scan, and we found a variety of leaders within education who are helping youth thrive. And interestingly, most of those leaders ended up being from locations that worked specifically with indigenous youth. So we found leaders in that field in New Zealand, in Hawaii, and in New Mexico. And so my role, as we were kind of learning from these people, was to bring them together. And we did a training really for a school in Arizona. And so a lot of the work I did was around managing and planning the trainings for teachers, staff, and administrators, bringing together this collective of people from internationally.
Thank you, Linda. Again, my name is Roberto Rivera. My technical title is I'm the Executive Director of the Alliance for the Seventh Generation, an international not-for-profit organization really focused on creating thriving educational ecosystems by, for, and with youth and communities really being at the center of that change. As Jennifer was discussing, a lot of this began as kind of a global inquiry, wondering where in the world are historically marginalized youth thriving culturally, socially, emotionally, academically, dare I say, spiritually, And so through a combination of both consulting the literature and going through all the well-being research and education, trauma-informed care, social emotional learning, talking to some of the experts in the world, we were able to locate three exemplary locations, as Jennifer said, in New Zealand, New Mexico, and Hawaii. And rather than just kind of learn and extract that information and try to go use it, we decided to create a global alliance and network of scholars and practitioners and organic intellectuals. And, it's really interesting that although we didn't, really look for this initially, these were all folks using indigenous forms of philosophy and education. And they weren't using, terminology that we use in the West of emotional intelligence or social emotional learning or trauma-informed care. This was, ancient practices that were made relevant in the contemporary present.
With the indigenous populations. Could you tell us, the importance of that framing or of reframing the narrative of looking at someone from a traumatic lens perspective to a well-being lens?
So I think it's important to underscore, Linda, that a lot of coming into this work, we enter the space with 20 years of practice working in communities, working in teen centers, out of school programs in schools, and also now more recently, bringing that research lens. So I kind of joke that I'm like a DJ. On one turntable, I have the evidence-based practice, and on the other turntable, I have the practice-based evidence. And the work is really to try to converge and find that break between theory and practice, to really live in that space of praxis, right? Mm-hmm. And so, you know, a lot of the work initially was very arts and community and culturally focused. Mm-hmm. We were, you know, collaborating with dancers and folks from Africa and Native American folks, and, you know, even European dancers, and doing a lot of stuff with hip hop and theater and different arts festivals. And we were engaging youth on a very high level, and seeing, you know, youth who, quote unquote, were called at risk and treated as objects to be changed, really emerging and showing themselves as at opportunity youth who are able to be agents of change. And so we were doing this transformative work, and it wasn't just transforming the youth, it was transforming us as well. And I think at a certain point, we had enough kind of evidence of impact and transformation that we started being asked by educators, and even at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, they said, you know, can you teach a course about your pedagogy, right? And so we started, you know, teaching courses and graduate folks. And really at that moment in time, it was so practice-based, you know, it was like, okay, you know, here's the profile of this student who's totally disengaged, and here is how you engage him or her or they, right? Mm-hmm. And as things kind of progressed, we realized, oh, okay, you know, there's theory that kind of helps to name what it is that we're doing. Oh, social and emotional learning. Oh, culturally relevant pedagogy. Oh, positive youth development. Oh, critical pedagogy, right? So there's a lot of different language that we kind of started to use to describe this work, to validate it more from an academic standpoint. What was happening at home, but what was happening in the community, what was happening structurally with racism. And what we saw with these youth is when they began to get into a space that created safety, a space that was, you know, culturally relevant and holistically engaging them. When we treated them like they could be these agents of change, they didn't just become normal. They weren't just resilient. They would become super empowered, very, very purposeful, and very, you know, enhance interpersonal relationships. And some of the language that we began to come across that started to describe this phenomenon was post-traumatic growth, right? Where all of that pain and all that hurt became like this propane and fuel for empowerment and transformation for their community. So that was a kind of a big shift and like an aha moment.
As we transitioned, we started under the auspices of social emotional learning. And from social emotional learning, we became interested in the ideas and the theories behind trauma-informed care. But as we kind of researched and began to better understand trauma-informed care, we realized that it tended to have a deficit approach, mm-hmm. and a focus not for youth on thriving, but more on survival. Mm-hmm. So just, or perhaps not even survivable, but just not totally failing. Mm-hmm. So trauma-informed care, while it addressed important things and it allowed for, you know, hurts to be seen, it wasn't as though that hurt, you could imagine that hurt becoming something good. It was sort of like a hurt that was at best going to be put a Band-Aid on. Mm-hmm. So from there, we began to research healing-centered engagement. And so with healing-centered engagement, as Roberto said, there was an idea that there was an end game. Mm-hmm. And I think that that was really difficult because we came to the research around that just at the same time as like a lot of, you know, George Floyd was murdered. There was a lot of racial tension going mm-hmm. on, and realizing that like you can't heal from something that you're still being wounded by necessarily. You need to allow for a practice of well-being. And so we began to imagine, okay, if you can't, to call it healing-centered engagement suggests that the hurt has passed and now you can be better from it. Mm-hmm. So we began kind of understanding, okay, we need to approach it. And as Roberto said, we learned from this gentleman, and I think it was New Mexico, who said, you know, we are focusing more on well-being. And so the work that we do has honed even beyond well-being into critical well-being, which admits the contextual experience where you are trying to be well. So you're not just saying, you know, in Madison, you and I, we have access to beautiful parks. We can go for a walk easily in the Arboretum. We can like navigate quite easily a very beautiful natural setting, which is not necessarily the case for every person. So understanding contextually, like, how can you be well where you are? It's not just a blanket of like, you know, sure, I might find my well-being by connecting with nature or doing this or that, but like understanding that there's a variety of ways that one can pursue well-being and wellness. And ultimately, the most valuable thing, and I think that something we've left out, is understanding that the most important thing for promoting and supporting well-being is to understand the context that an individual or a community is operating in, and how that community or individual defines well-being, because certainly it won't be the same.
Yeah.
So then trying to find ways to understand and support with like not putting judgment on how people define well-being. So again, that critical well-being, which really allows contextual understanding of how well-being is defined by a person or a community.
I think healing-centered education has created and provided an important shift to say, look, you know, we need to understand that trauma is not just experienced individually. There are policies and systems and structures that are creating a context for communal trauma to take place. We need to think about, you know, people not just around the notion of their, you know, the worst thing that happened to them, but they have assets that we need to, you know, recognize and celebrate and bring to the forefront. And that, you know, we should engage these communities as having the capability of, you know, being part of their own solutions. I think critical well-being says there's another shift that's necessary, and that is a shift, as Jennifer said, that we can't use, you know, one definition of well-being in one place and apply that to everybody. If we're going to do this work and we're going to allow folks to have agency, you know, to really feel like this is their thing, they need to define what constitutes well-being to them. You know, what may constitute well-being, you know, for one group of people, if we try to map that onto another group, that could be very oppressive and a very colonial approach to the work. Critical well-being says, look, you know, it's not just individually, but our interpersonal and our institutions also need to be recalibrated to humanizing people and allowing for these communities to really flourish. And then, you know, I think lastly, as Jennifer said, you know, this work is a lifestyle. We're trying to build this beloved community. We're trying to build this culture of love, where everyone feels affirmed in their identity, where everybody has the grace to become multiculturally competent, where we can learn how to really understand and speak linguistically and culturally, cross-culturally with people from different backgrounds, and understand that, look, there is a possibility of operating where every day we learn to better love ourselves, better learn to love each other, and we learn to better love our planet and our communities around us. You know, and so I think that's the shift that we're calling for right now.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate the work of creating a world where everybody thrives and not just survives. Thank you so much.